The hospital lights hummed above as I stared at the man lying unconscious in the bed, his chest rising in uneven rhythms. My name is Aaron Blake, and this broken man was once the indomitable patriarch of my family. Until yesterday, he hadn't known I was alive. Not really. He knew I existed, sure. Knew I'd taken off after college, joined some government thing, as he called it. Knew I never came back for holidays or birthdays. But what he didn't know was that for the past decade, I'd built a life that could rival anything he ever dreamed of. And the irony? The defense project he nearly died overseeing, well, I had the final say on it. This was no victory lap, though. Standing in this sterile room, watching monitors beep like a ticking reminder of time lost, I felt none of the satisfaction I once imagined. All I felt was a heavy knot of emotions I couldn't name. Guilt, vindication, sadness, maybe even regret. Let's rewind. 2 days ago, I returned to my hometown of Halstead Ridge, a compact steel town in upstate New York that wore its manufacturing legacy like a second skin. My childhood home sat on a quiet street of maple-lined sidewalks and American flags, the kind of neighborhood that hadn't changed since the 80s. Except now, the houses were older, the flags more faded, and the expectations heavier. I hadn't told anyone I was coming, not my mother, not my sister, and especially not my father. The only person who knew was my former professor and mentor, Dr. Sylvia Vega, now a top consultant for the Department of Defense. She had insisted I attend the formal contract review at Stradium Technologies, the town's largest employer and the company where my father had worked his way from engineer to board chairman. And I was the lead systems architect and military advisor for the Cyber Intelligence Division, reviewing Stradium's new high-security defense systems. Systems my father had proudly claimed to spearhead. The irony? That same project was being overseen, audited, and signed off by me, his son, the one who had wasted his education on a keyboard job. I arrived on a chilly Friday evening. The sun had dipped below the pines as I pulled into the driveway. The house looked exactly the same. Cracked steps, creaky porch swing, and wind chimes clinking in a lazy breeze. I knocked instead of walking. When the door opened, my mother blinked at me like she was seeing a ghost. "Aaron?" she gasped, her hands fluttering to her chest. "Hi, Mom," I said quietly. "Is now a bad time?" Tears filled her eyes instantly. She pulled me into a hug, murmuring, "Oh my God, oh honey." I held her awkwardly, surprised at how small she felt, like the years had drained her volume. She ushered me in with shaking hands, calling out toward the back of the house, "Leah, your brother's home?" Leah, my younger sister by 3 years, appeared from the hallway like a specter. Her long black hair was tied back in a bun, and her nurse's scrub suggested she had just returned from a shift. She stopped mid-step, her mouth parting in disbelief. "You're kidding." "I missed the place," I offered. "You missed the place," she repeated, folding her arms, but the corner of her mouth twitched. "Do you even remember where your room is?" If this story has you hooked, tap that like button to show some love. Drop a comment with your thoughts or predictions, and subscribe so you never miss a story that leaves your heart racing and your mind spinning. Let's dive into the story now. Top of the stairs. Right, same posters on the wall? She raised a brow. Dad replaced them with plaques of American presidents. I blinked. You're joking. Nope. Figures. Dinner that night was the expected tangle of polite inquiries, awkward silences, and long stretches of memory-laden conversation that tiptoed around anything meaningful. My mother, Sarah, tried valiantly to talk about her quilting group. Leah shared some story about a patient trying to flirt with her in the ER, and I nodded along, responding with vague stories from work with a defense research group that avoided specifics. No one asked why I was really in town. My father, Leonard Blake, hadn't arrived yet. He had a last-minute call with the Stradium board, Mom explained as she spooned mashed potatoes onto my plate. He's been under so much pressure with the new contract. I already knew. I'd reviewed the entire project file. He'd been pushing for risky implementations, cutting corners to meet unrealistic deadlines, and ignoring key protocol recommendations. some of which I personally red-flagged. When he finally came through the door, still in his black wool coat, scarf slung carelessly over his shoulder, he stopped cold upon seeing me. For a long second, no one said a word. "Dad?" I said finally. He set down his briefcase. "You look older. You look the same." A grunt. "Didn't know you were visiting. Wasn't sure I'd be welcome." He walked past without another word, straight to the kitchen to pour himself a drink. Scotch. Neat. Later that night, I sat alone in my old bedroom, now converted into a makeshift storage room. The walls had once been covered with schematics, sci-fi posters, and old robotics competition trophies. Now shelves were lined with my father's old files and boxes labeled Leah's med school and Christmas decorations. There wasn't a trace of me left. I didn't sleep. Instead, I woke before dawn and dressed in my uniform, sharp navy slacks, formal jacket with the government insignia stitched above the left breast, and the Level 6 military advisory badge clipped at the collar. My ID rested in a slim leather case. I slid it into my inner pocket and headed out. The Stradium building looked like a fortress carved into glass, sleek, symmetrical, and intimidating. Security at the front entrance barely blinked when they saw my clearance. "Welcome, Director Blake. Conference Room B is on Level 9. The board is already assembling." "Thank you." As I stepped into the executive elevator, I took a deep breath. I hadn't come to prove anything to anyone. I had come to do my job. But some part of me, a small, bitter, unspoken part, wanted my father to finally see what I had become. When the elevator doors opened, I walked into a room of suited executives and high-level defense contractors. One of them stood immediately. "Director Blake," she greeted me with a firm handshake. "It's an honor to have you here in person." "Likewise, Ms. Lang. I appreciate the warm welcome." Across the room, my father had just turned away from the window. The blood drained from his face when he saw me. And then, just like that, the balance shifted. He now worked for a project I governed. He didn't speak, just stared, brows furrowed. I gave a small nod. "Chairman Blake." "Aaron," he said, as if the name itself were a betrayal. Before he could process anything further, the meeting began. I was introduced by name and title: Aaron Blake, Director of Advanced Cyber Systems, Department of Defense, and I could see my father's confusion grow with each passing sentence. And that was just the beginning. The conference room walls were lined with glossy screens displaying schematic data, projected attack simulations, and system performance under duress. One by one, the Stradium team presented their metrics. And one by one I dissected them. I didn't have to assert authority. It radiated from the badge, the title, the way every technical lead deferred to me. What I had spent years refining, adaptive intrusion detection algorithms, quantum-resistant encryption, and behavioral analytics for insider threat prevention, was now the gold standard in modern defense systems. "Regarding Module Delta," I interrupted one presenter, "your system relies on a single-point authentication model for privileged access. Why wasn't a zero-trust architecture implemented, given the sensitivity of the data flows?" The presenter, a middle-aged man in a tailored Navy suit, stumbled. "We, prioritized operational speed to meet deployment timelines." I glanced at the projection, highlighting a segment of their authentication pipeline. "This design allows a lateral movement attack within seconds if a credential is compromised. Our tests at DARPA showed that a zero-trust model with dynamic key rotation reduces breach windows by 87%. You're leaving a gap that a state-sponsored actor could exploit with a simple spear phishing campaign." My words fell heavy. Behind me, someone whispered. I didn't turn to look, but I knew who it was. Leonard Blake, my father. The same man who had once told me I lacked the ruthlessness to survive in a high-stakes industry. The same man who scoffed when I won the National Science Challenge because the trophy wasn't useful in the real world. And now, here he was, forced to witness me point out fundamental flaws in a system he'd claimed credit for leading. The meeting ended with a brief nod from the company's president, Nora Lang. We're fortunate to have Director Blake involved. He's saved us months of review already. Everyone clapped, except my father. He stayed seated, rigid, eyes fixed ahead. I packed up my tablet and documents, keeping my composure, then exited the room first. But as I reached the elevator, I heard him call after me. Aaron, a moment. I turned. He approached, slower than I remembered. He looked older, less invincible. I didn't know you were involved, he said, voice low. I figured as much. I also didn't know you were in uniformed service. I'm not enlisted. Civilian director. I was recruited after finishing at MIT. Defense analytics. His brow furrowed. You didn't go to Stanford? No. MIT offered me a research track. It suited me better. He nodded slowly, taking this in like a foreign language. You didn't say anything all these years. Would it have mattered? He didn't answer. Instead, he said, the security modifications you flagged, do you really think they're that flawed? Leonard, I said, using his first name intentionally. If your team had deployed that system on a live field server, an attacker could have used a privilege escalation exploit to bypass your controls in under 3 minutes. He stared at me. And how do you know that? Because I've seen it happen. In Belgium during a NATO stress test. In Jordan, on a joint task force server. And once in a domestic simulation we barely caught in time. Something changed, in his eyes like a fog lifting. But then came the wall. Well, we'll rework it, thanks for your input. Input. That word, so small, so dismissive, it reminded me why I'd left this place in the first place. Not just the town, but the air of quiet superiority that clung to my father like an expensive overcoat. I left without saying anything further. Later that evening, I visited Leah. Her small apartment above the fire station was modest, but homey. Warm lighting, worn bookshelves, and a blanket she crocheted draped over the couch. You dropped a bomb today, she said, handing me a mug of herbal tea. Not my intention. She sipped her drink and stared. You've been gone 10 years, Aaron. 10. Then you come back in a suit that makes generals salute and drop a report that basically tells Dad his life's work is full of holes. He shouldn't take it personally, this is national security. He always takes things personally, she replied, especially when it comes to you. There was a long pause. Why didn't you ever come home? She asked finally. I looked down at the steam rising from my cup. Because I got tired of being invisible. Leah softened. You weren't invisible to me. I smiled faintly. I know. We talked late into the night, about her nursing rotations, my travel schedule, our mother's relentless perfectionism. For the first time in years, I felt tethered. The next morning, I headed back to Stradium. The second review was more intense, this time with a Department of Energy liaison joining remotely and General Forrester observing via encrypted channel. The project was that high level. I gave a full report on their vulnerabilities and outlined a corrective roadmap, emphasizing multi-factor authentication with biometric verification and segmented network enclaves to prevent lateral attacks. Afterward, while the rest of the team dispersed, Nora Lang approached me. You were extraordinary, she said. You should be proud of the work you've built. I am. She glanced over her shoulder. Your father is under pressure, you know. He's been holding this company up for years. Doesn't mean he's right about everything, but his name carries weight around here. Maybe it's time they see a different name, I said. Her eyes sparkled. Maybe so. Later that afternoon, I was formally invited, to attend the board dinner with Stradium's executive team. An unexpected gesture considering external advisors usually weren't brought into social functions. But I accepted. That evening, I returned home briefly to change into a formal suit. My mother greeted me at the door with a strained smile. Going somewhere important? Dinner with the Stradium board. Her brows lifted. Really? They invited you? Yes. She stood quietly for a moment. You look grown. I am. Then, as if unable to help herself, she added, I wish you'd told us. I tried. You didn't listen. She looked wounded, but I didn't have it in me to soften the truth. At the dinner, I was seated between Nora Lang and the energy liaison across from my father. His expression betrayed nothing. But midway through the meal, as discussions turned to future integration of Stradium's infrastructure with DoD protocols, he cleared his throat. I propose we defer to Director Blake's recommendation on the implementation layers. Clearly, his expertise in the matter surpasses mine. You could have heard a pin drop. I looked at him, not masking my surprise. Nora nodded. Agreed. And just like that, the tide shifted. After dinner, as the guests filtered out, Leonard walked beside me. I don't understand everything you do, he said, but I saw today what everyone else sees, and I think I owe you an apology. I stopped. Dad, it was never about an apology. It was about you seeing me. Well, he said, voice lower, I see you now. And for the first time in years, I believed him. It was the smallest gesture that struck me most, when my father placed his hand briefly on my shoulder before we parted ways that night. No grand speech, no paternal confession, just a weighty touch that said in its own silent language, I understand now. I didn't expect everything to change overnight, but I hadn't expected anything to change at all. The next morning was quiet. No Stradium meetings, no protocols to approve. Just time. I found myself at Millstone Diner, a local spot I hadn't set foot in since high school. Nothing had changed. Greasy booths, waitresses with weary smiles, and the comforting smell of butter-soaked toast. Leah joined me an hour later. You're up early for someone who dismantled a multi-million-dollar proposal yesterday, she teased, sliding into the booth. Even demigods need pancakes, I replied. She smirked. You know, Dad called me last night. Yeah? Said you were brilliant. Actually used the word brilliant. I thought the line dropped. I raised a brow. He also said you were a hard man to read, that you reminded him of Grandpa. Our grandfather, Elias Blake, had been a Navy communications analyst, silent, sharp, and impossible to impress. My father once called him the most frustrating man he'd ever known. You know what I think? Leah asked, sipping her coffee. What? I think he's finally proud of you, even if he doesn't know how to say it. That landed heavier than she knew. We spent most of the morning together. She took me by the old middle school, then down to the Riverwalk Trail where we used to ride bikes. It was peaceful, so different from the code-heavy halls of Pentagon subcommittees and DC security briefings I'd grown used to. For the first time in a long time, I felt grounded, but the calm wouldn't last. That afternoon, I got a call from Dr. Sylvia Vega. Her voice was tight. Aaron, I need you in DC tonight. We've got chatter about a breach attempt near the Stradium test servers. My stomach dropped. When did this start? About an hour ago. Someone's probing the network with a custom-built exploit targeting the authentication pipeline you flagged. My mind raced. I'll catch the next train. Have them send the logs to my secure inbox. Already done. By the time I boarded the Northeast Express to Washington, my thoughts were a cyclone of probabilities. This wasn't just a local systems error anymore. It was a calculated move. Someone with internal knowledge was feeding critical information to an outside source, probably a foreign actor. Back in DC, I went straight to the agency's cybersecurity lab. 2 specialists were already parsing packets and tracing IP origins. The breach attempt had come from multiple spoof servers across Eastern Europe, but one login trace had pinged through Halstead Ridge, from inside Stradium's firewall. Someone on the inside, and with access to my report. I pulled up access, logs from the night before. Only 3 people had clearance high enough to view that document before the breach. Nora Lang, the VP of Infrastructure, and my father. I froze. He wasn't a hacker, not that kind. But what if he'd forwarded the document? What if, in a misguided attempt to loop in an old contact or rush development, He had passed along something he shouldn't have. Or worse, what if someone had accessed it through him? I needed answers. Fast. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I drafted a formal memo authorizing an internal review and flagged the 3 names. Officially, it was a compliance audit. Unofficially, it was a hunt. The next day, I requested a video call with Nora Lang. I need transparency, I told her, tone clipped. There's been an attempted intrusion. Protocols suggest an internal leak. Her face tightened. Are you suggesting Stradium is compromised? I'm not suggesting, I'm investigating. I see, and how can I help? Grant me unrestricted access to employee activity logs for the past 72 hours. That includes board members. Exactly. She hesitated for only a second before nodding. Granted, I'll notify IT. The logs revealed a pattern. Over the past month, irregular access attempts had been made from a secondary account linked to Trevor Hale, VP of Operations. The attempts were subtle, masked as routine file transfers, but they targeted sensitive project folders, including my report. At 11:07 p.m. the previous night, a Stradium desktop had accessed the secure report via a private network tunnel. The user ID was masked, but the machine's device ID matched one registered to my father's office. I sat still for a long time, staring at the screen. It didn't make sense. My father had just started acknowledging my work. He wouldn't sabotage it now, would he? I made the call. He answered on the second ring. Aaron, are you alone? He paused. Yes, what's wrong? I need to talk to you, privately, now. I caught a red-eye flight and landed, just after dawn. He met me at the community library, away from Stradium and the prying eyes of the company. We sat in a quiet reading room, surrounded by dusty encyclopedias and the faint hum of the HVAC. I need to ask you something, I said. He nodded, clearly sensing the shift in tone. Did you share my security report with anyone? He blinked. No, I didn't even forward it. Are you sure? Yes, he said, but his face was clouding over. Why are you asking me this? Because someone accessed the report from your machine, and less than 30 minutes later, an intrusion attempt was launched based on the vulnerabilities outlined in. The room was tense. My father sat at the long oak conference table, stiffer than usual, but clearly respected by his peers. Nora stood beside a large digital display with timelines and evidence summaries queued up. Trevor's crimes were detailed point by point. Unauthorized data access, breach of federal confidentiality, corporate espionage, and endangerment of national defense protocols. After the presentation, Nora turned to face the board. Thanks to Director Blake's vigilance and Stradium's compliance, we avoided what could have been a catastrophic breach of national security. Let the record show this company will continue to prioritize integrity, transparency, and absolute compliance moving forward. There was a murmur of agreement around the room. Then, unexpectedly, Nora stepped aside and motioned to me. Director Blake, would you care to speak? I hadn't prepared a speech, but I stood anyway. I appreciate the cooperation I've received from Stradium's leadership team during this process. This event reminds us that trust is not just a value, it's a system. When that system is compromised, the cost is measured not just in money or reputation, but in lives and national security. I paused, scanning the room. I'm not just an auditor. I'm a builder. I build systems meant to outlast us, meant to protect the people who can't sit in rooms like this and defend themselves. So we must hold ourselves to standards that cannot be bought or manipulated. I looked toward my father. And we must never assume those closest to us are incapable of betrayal or incapable of redemption. He held my gaze. For once, I saw no pride, no stubbornness, just respect. After the meeting, Nora asked to speak privately. You know, Aaron, she said as we walked down the glass corridor, your father always talked about legacy. But after watching you these last few days, I think you've already built one. I offered a small smile. If only it didn't come with such a steep learning curve. Legacy worth anything usually does. Outside, the press had begun to catch wind of the arrest. Cameras gathered at the front steps. Stratium's PR team spun the story carefully. A lone bad actor, caught by internal diligence and government cooperation. The truth for once wasn't twisted. I took no part in the press statements. That wasn't my arena. Instead, I walked through the quiet back corridor and found my way to the upper observation deck, a secluded space overlooking the company's Trendy Center. My father joined me a few minutes later, silent. He leaned on the rail beside me. "I heard what you said in there," he began, "about betrayal and redemption." I didn't reply. "You were right. I left my system open. It was careless." "I don't think it was just that," I said after a moment. "I think you wanted to trust someone. You wanted things to move forward. You were willing to ignore the risks." He sighed. "When you've spent a lifetime climbing, you forget what it means to pause and assess." "Or listen," I added. He nodded slowly. "That too?" We stood in silence, watching engineers bustle below like ants over microchips and circuit boards. Finally, he turned to me. "Will you come to dinner tonight? Just you, me, your mother, and Leah." I hesitated, then nodded. Back at the house that evening, the air felt different. My mother greeted me not with tension but with a quiet kind of relief. She had cooked, something homemade for the first time in years, a roast she knew I liked as a kid. Leah was already there, chatting comfortably at the kitchen island. The dining room table had been set carefully. Even a few old family photos had reappeared, ones that included me. Dinner began with awkward chatter, how the day had gone, how the town was reacting to the scandal, what the next steps would be for Stratium. But soon, the conversation shifted. "Your report," my father said, cutting into his food. "That was surgical, thorough. Even before we knew about Trevor, I could tell you hadn't just skimmed things. You understood everything." "I had to. People's lives are affected by that kind of code." He nodded. "I used to say the same thing. I just lost track of the people part somewhere along the way." There was something fragile in his voice I hadn't heard before. Not defeat, but honesty. My mother put her fork down. "Aaron, I owe you an apology too." I looked up, surprised. "I always thought you were trying to escape us. That when you left it was to spite your father, to rebel. But I see now. You were doing something much bigger. And I was too small to see it." Her voice cracked on the last sentence. I sat back, unsure of how to respond. Leah, ever the bridge between us, reached across the table and touched my arm. "They see you now, Aaron. Maybe not everything, but enough." And somehow that was enough for me too. We ended the meal with an old family ritual, chocolate chip cookies and black tea. The years between us melted like ice in warm hands. That night, as I prepared to head back to DC the next morning, my father knocked gently on the door of my childhood room, now cleared, cleaned, and refitted with a guest bed. He stepped in and held out a small black case. "I kept this," he said. Inside was the metal pin from my first robotics competition. He had told me once it was just a school prize, but here it was, polished and preserved. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. I held the pin in my hand. "You were always building something," he added. "I just didn't see the foundation you were laying." I looked up at him. "Thanks, Dad." He gave a nod. "I hope this isn't the last time you visit." It won't be, and for the first time in 10 years I meant it. Back in DC, my world returned to its usual rhythm. Coded reports, classified briefings, and endless cybersecurity drills. But something within me had shifted. The defenses I had built so carefully, not digital ones but emotional ones, had softened. Not broken, but recalibrated. Dr. Sylvia Vega noticed almost immediately. "You look lighter," she said, walking into my office during a Tuesday morning debrief. "Guess I'm just sleeping better," She smiled. Or maybe you finally let go of some ghosts. Maybe. She set her tablet down and got straight to business. The fallout from the Stradium breach has prompted a full nationwide review of all civilian defense contractors. And I'm assigning you as lead coordinator. I blinked. That's going to be massive. It is, she said. And there's only one person I trust to handle it. I straightened. Thank you, ma'am. You earned it, she replied. Don't let your father's late realization confuse the issue. This is about your merit, not theirs. I know, but it's still nice to be seen, she paused. You ever think about teaching, Aaron? You've got a gift. I laughed. I've spent the last 5 years trying to avoid speaking in public. True, she said, smirking. But that's why you'd be good at it. You wouldn't showboat. You'd show up. I didn't respond, but the idea stuck with me longer than I expected. Over the following weeks, I worked closely with teams across 5 different firms, helping them restructure their protocols, audit their access logs, and future-proof their systems with machine learning-driven threat detection and post-quantum cryptography. I traveled constantly from Boston to San Diego to Denver, and each time I returned to DC, I felt more grounded. And with each trip, I started getting messages from home. Short ones at first, a photo from Leah of a Stradium employee bulletin that now cited Blake Protocol Level 2 as standard operating procedure. A video clip from my mother showing my father speaking at a town forum, openly crediting the work of my son, Aaron Blake, whose insight protected not just our company, but our country. One night Leah called just to say hi. Mom finally gave away your old varsity jacket, she said with a grin. She said you outgrew it, professionally and otherwise. I chuckled. She's not wrong. I meant what I said at dinner, Leah added. I hope you come back more often. I want to. You mean that? I do. My visits to Halstead Ridge started becoming routine, sometimes just a weekend, sometimes just a day, but with each return it felt less like a battleground and more like a home base. My father and I didn't become best friends overnight. We still disagreed on plenty, politics, ethics, even football teams, but our conversations became conversations, not lectures. And then, one snowy January evening, something happened that changed everything. Sylvia called me in with urgency. We intercepted a data anomaly, she said, pulling up a screen in the war room. Not a breach, something stranger. She played a short clip of a simulation ping, encrypted, masked, and routed through dormant military ports. Where is this coming from, I asked. Outside the U.S. We traced it to a shadow IP operating from within Finland's neutral defense sector. But here's the kicker. It's using a variation of your old adaptive threat model, the one with the neural network-based anomaly detection. I stared. That framework was never deployed. Exactly, she said, except it was demoed once, 5 years ago, at an open-source summit in Munich. That summit had been the only time I allowed an early version of my predictive threat model to be shared outside the government, intended for public collaboration. Someone's built on top of your design, Sylvia continued, and it's beautiful, clean, efficient, adaptive. It's using a hybrid LSTM model to predict intrusion patterns in real time. I zoomed in on the signal structure. That's not just an adaptation, that's my logic tree, tweaked with a reinforcement learning layer I hadn't considered. My mind went to the summit, scanning back through memories. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s, had approached me with a tablet and asked for permission to test a simulated fork of my algorithm. I hadn't even asked her name. Whoever built this, Sylvia said, just blocked a Chinese infiltration attempt into one of our unmanned drone control networks. They beat us to it silently, anonymously. What do we do? Sylvia grinned. We find them, and we recruit them. 3 days later, our team tracked the signal to a small lab at the University of Copenhagen. The developer was a graduate student, Ella Vinter, working on a PhD in computational security. When I arrived at her lab, she looked stunned. You're Aaron Blake, she said, standing abruptly. I am, I replied, and I came to thank you. She smiled sheepishly. I didn't think anyone would notice my patch. We noticed. Over the course of an hour, we reviewed her model, her simulations, and her intentions. They were pure. She had seen the Munich demo, built on my structure, and created something new, something more elegant than even I had envisioned. I think we could use your help, I said before leaving. She looked shocked. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a future, and just like that, I was no longer the lone innovator. I had become the recruiter, the mentor, the very thing Sylvia had been to me. Back in DC, I recommended Ella for a classified internship, and within 2 weeks, she was cleared for tier, to access. Her input revitalized multiple systems, and soon her name started circulating quietly among defense committees. Sylvia pulled me aside one evening after a briefing. She reminds me of you, she said. I nodded. I know. She also reminds me, she continued, why we need to stay in this game, not for the power but for the people like her who still believe in the work. I thought of my father, of Leah, of home, and I understood, truly understood for the first time what legacy meant. Not just accomplishments, but the lives you lift up along the way. 6 months later, I found myself standing backstage at the National Cybersecurity Summit in Washington, D.C., the most high-profile event of my career so far. Diplomats, CEOs, senators, and military brass filled the main auditorium. And for the first time, I wasn't attending as a shadow consultant or quiet analyst. I was the keynote speaker. Sylvia had nominated me for the honor, and despite my objections, the committee had unanimously agreed. You've led the most successful multi-agency integration in recent history, she said during our prep call. It's time the public knows who you are. I adjusted my tie in the mirror and glanced at the small gold pin on my lapel, a gift from Leah, engraved with my initials and the phrase, build quietly, defend loudly. Outside the curtain, a voice announced, please, welcome Director Aaron Blake of the Department of Defense. As I walked onto the stage, applause erupted, not thunderous but steady, respectful. I reached the podium, heart pounding, and looked out at the sea of faces. Some familiar, most not. And somewhere in the third row, seated between Sylvia and a Pentagon deputy, sat my father. He had made the trip. Our eyes met. He nodded once. I took a deep breath and began. For years, we treated cybersecurity like plumbing, hidden infrastructure that only matters when it breaks. But today we live in a world where code is both the sword and the shield. The battlefield is silent, but the stakes are deafening. I paused. I've been part of systems that catch the cracks before the walls fall. But cracks don't just appear in firewalls. They appear in families, in trust, in institutions. And what I've learned is this. Fixing the code is easy. Fixing what we ignore, that's harder. As the room fell into a deeper silence, I continued. When we lead, we must remember why. It's not to be seen, it's to serve, not for power, for protection. Because somewhere out there, someone's daughter is logging into school from a cafe in a war zone. Someone's mother is operating a field hospital without backup power. And if we fail to protect their systems, we fail them. When I finished, the applause was louder. Some stood, I nodded, grateful but ready to escape the spotlight. Backstage, my father was waiting. You weren't just good, he said. You were necessary. I blinked. That's not what I expected to hear. Well, I've had a habit of not saying what I should. He paused. But I'm trying to change that. We walked together down the hallway lined with framed portraits of past summit leaders. Men and women I had once only read about. Now, I was among them. I told your mother you'd get a standing ovation, he said, with the smallest smile. She didn't believe you? She believed it, she just cried. I smiled. Later that evening, we gathered at a quiet restaurant a few blocks from the Capitol. My mother, Leah, Megan, Leah's partner, and even Sylvia joined us. It was the first time I'd ever seen all of them in one place. I thought you didn't do events like this, I teased Leah as she sipped wine. I didn't, she replied. But your speech made me realize I'd regret missing it. My mother beamed. It was brilliant, sweetheart. And terrifying, Megan added with a grin, made me want to throw away my phone. Everyone laughed. Even Sylvia, who normally remained composed, raised her glass and said, "To Aaron, builder of walls and bridges." We toasted, the glasses clinking like a chorus of small victories. As the night wore on, my father pulled me aside. "There's something else I want to talk to you about," he said. "I'm retiring." I blinked. "Really?" After 35 years, Stradium's ready for the next chapter, and I think I am too. "That's big news." He nodded. "But here's the thing. They asked me to recommend someone to lead the next innovation unit, and I want to recommend you." My eyes widened. "Me?" "As an advisor, not a desk job. They'll give you full independence, budget, access, creative direction." I sat with that for a moment. Stradium, the company that had once dismissed me through my father, now wanted me to help lead its next era. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I already have a mission." He nodded slowly. "I figured you'd say that, but I had to ask." "Then let me make a counteroffer," I said. "Let me nominate someone else." He raised an eyebrow. "Her name is Ella Vinter. Brilliant mind. She's the future." "I'll take a look," he said, and I knew he meant it. As the evening wound down, I stepped outside for some air. The Capitol lights glowed softly in the distance, and the sky above was clear, rare, for a DC night. Sylvia joined me, her coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "You could have had any job after today," she said. "Still can." "I have the one I want," I replied. She nodded. "Then I guess it's time to start thinking about what comes next." I looked at her puzzled. "You've spent a decade fixing systems," she continued. "Maybe now you build one that runs without you." "You mean?" She smiled. "You won't be the new Sylvia, Aaron. You'll be the first you. But I'm recommending you for a new role, National Security Director for Cyber Intelligence." I froze. "That's big," she finished, "and overdue." The stars above flickered. I felt for the first time not pulled by the gravity of legacy, but standing in it, ready. 6 months later, I hosted everyone at my new home in DC, a modern loft overlooking the Potomac River, with clean lines, minimalist furniture, and, for the first time in my life, walls that held pictures of people I chose. Not medals, not awards, but people. There was a framed photo of Leah and me from our childhood, muddy shoes and all. Another of my mother laughing while decorating a holiday cake. One of Ella receiving her security badge, stunned and proud. And one of my father and me shaking hands outside Stradium headquarters, the building behind us glowing under the dusk sky. That evening, we gathered again. My parents, Leah and Megan, Sylvia, Ella, and a few of the junior analysts I had recently begun mentoring. I cooked dinner myself. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and a fig and goat cheese tart that Sylvia had once claimed could earn a Michelin star. The conversation was warm, effortless. There was no invisible weight pressing on anyone's shoulders, no need to tiptoe around who I was or who they expected me to be. Just presence. Just peace. At one point, my father wandered over to my bookshelf, scanning the titles. Books on AI ethics, cyber warfare history, and philosophy. He pulled one down. The Invisible Architect, Building Systems in the Shadows. "I started this a while ago," he said, turning it in his hands. "Never finished it." "You should," I said. "Chapter 4 is where it starts getting honest." He nodded and tucked it under his arm. "Thanks." Later that evening, Leah joined me on the balcony while Megan helped my mom with dessert. "You did it," she said quietly. "Did what?" "Proved them wrong, built something better, made a space for all of us to breathe." I smiled. "I didn't do it alone." "No," she agreed. "But you did it first." She hugged me. And for the first time in years, I let myself feel the completeness of that gesture. Not obligation, not performance, just connection. As the night faded, Sylvia stood to give a brief toast. To Director Aaron Blake, she said, glass raised, who never asked to be recognized but ended up becoming the standard by which we measure leadership. To quiet brilliance, unshakable ethics, and the courage to choose integrity over attention. You've earned every inch of the space you now stand in. Glasses clinked. My mother wiped away tears. My father looked at me not with pride, but with something deeper. Gratitude. After everyone left, I sat on the balcony alone. The city lights shimmered on the river, casting long reflections that swayed gently in the current. I thought about the boy who once built homemade firewalls in his basement, who once waited for a nod of approval that never came. I thought about the young man who left home to follow a code no one else understood, and I thought about the man I had become, no longer seeking validation, no longer hiding from his own brilliance, just being. I pulled out my old robotics competition pin, the one my father had kept all those years, and placed it on the shelf beside the photo of me and Leah. A reminder that everything starts somewhere. Enjoying the story so far? Hit that like button. If you're hooked, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. It really helps us grow and bring you more incredible true stories.